What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Happness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, it is my mission to help you to make workshops work. Today with me on the show is my fellow podcast host and facilitator, Leanne Hughes. And she shares how she gets her workshops to the next level by using the means of contrast. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand, which I strictly recommend, then no worries. Just visit workshops.work, find episode 45 and download mine. And now lean back and enjoy the show.
Leanne, hello.
Hello, Miriam.
I am so excited to host you on my show.
It's so great to reconnect with you and get any excuse to chat with you again, because I really enjoyed the conversation I had with you on my show.
Yes,
a couple of months
that was
ago.
Awesome on the First Time Facilitator podcast, episode 89, I think. We had such a great time, and now I'm happy to finally be on the other side of the mic and to ask you all the questions that I couldn't. You're a fellow podcast host, you're a fellow facilitator, you're traveling the world to deliver workshops, and you're so active on social media, so it's just a joy to follow you. So dear listener, if you're not following Leanne yet, change that immediately.
Thank you so much.
And maybe just to warm up, it would be super interesting to hear your story, how you got into facilitation, into podcasting, because there was a major pivot in your life.
Massive pivot. And well, it's funny because I think when I was younger, I really loved reading professional development books. Like one of my early Christmas presents, I think it was the age of 12, I got given the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. My dad just, because he's into personal development. And most people think it might be heavy reading for a 12-year-old, but I loved it. And back then, I mean, this is 20 years ago, personal and professional development wasn't really a big thing. The self-help section of bookstores were quite minimal compared to today. So I've always loved learning, and I studied HR and psychology at university, but kind of forgot about it because I entered the world of marketing for a while, and I thought, I'm just going to be a marketer forever. Yeah, until I started going to all these workshops and leadership development courses, and I was sitting in the room. I don't know if this works for some of your listeners or if it happened to you, Miriam, but you're in a workshop, you're listening to the facilitator and you're thinking, surely I could run this workshop a bit better, or like I know a little bit more, or they've responded to a question, I don't know if that's quite right. And I think got to that stage where I was like, I feel like I could possibly be that person up the front of the room, because I was noticing what was going on, and I thought there's a lot of wasted opportunity in these workshops. I think, I don't know, just facilitators going over time and not really engaging with the participants. And I thought, I'm really about making the most of the short time we have on earth. And when I'm in these meetings or workshops that just aren't going well, I just think surely there's better ways of doing this. So I think it was more, it was a case of I've always loved learning. I was noticing that maybe I had the skills to be a facilitator and to step up. And then luckily I was given some opportunities in internal roles for organizations.
Awesome. It almost sounds like a calling.
Yeah, I think that's right, because it's kind of like that feeling you get. It's like a whisper in your ear, like, and I get it during workshops as well, actually. It's like, just do that thing, like take that risk. But it was definitely kind of, it wasn't a conscious thought. It was more a nagging sensation, like, come on, Leanne, I think you could do this better. That's a good observation.
And I would love that the audience could actually see your eyes shining and your big smile while you're speaking about facilitation. It's nice.
Yeah, because it's one thing to think about it and then another thing to actually do it, right? I think we all remember our first workshop. And
do you remember the moment when you called yourself for the first time a facilitator?
Probably, I would say only in the last year and a half, 2 years, where I've started being confident in calling myself that. Because it's like I ran a marathon, but I was still didn't want to call myself a runner. Because
wow,
I had this perception of what runners are, and same as facilitators, I know what it's like to be in a room with someone that's really impressive. And I think with that comparisonitis, that comparing game, but I've been lucky enough to co-facilitate with great people, kind of got really good feedback that I store away in case I've had a bad session or something. I can look at the good feedback. And so, I've got more comfortable calling myself one in the last couple of years.
Isn't it funny how imposter syndrome is just always present?
It's always
independent on how successful you are, how much you run.
It doesn't matter who you talk to.
Don't you dare to call yourself a runner when you run a marathon.
I know. And have you read James Clear's book? It's called Atomic Habits.
Yes,
have you heard of that book?
Yes.
Because he said the best way to create a habit is actually to create the identity.
Yeah.
So what do runners do, or what do great facilitators do? They read a lot, they attend professional development, they actually facilitate, they get the feedback to get better. So I think I'm getting that identity and I'm doing all the things that I feel like great facilitators should do.
And to be consistent about what you're doing. Although you don't, I think you mentioned it in one of your social media posts that even if you don't feel like running, instead of just staying home, you just run a little bit. And then at least you might get motivated to run more, or maybe not, but it's consistent. Yeah,
motivation is a total myth, which is a big learning for me, but it's absolutely, motivation comes after the fact. It's reinforcing the daily behaviors. Yeah.
Awesome. If you were a hashtag, I'm sure every guest you get on the show is like, what a great question. I had to really think about this. If you ask me tomorrow, it might be something different. But for me today on this podcast, I'm going to say my hashtag is #show up. Show up. Yeah. So what does it mean to you to show up?
I think it links into what you just talked about in terms of consistency. And I think I'm really into maybe not personal brand so much as reputation. I feel like every interaction you have with someone, whether it's like a podcast interview with Miriam, an email, a LinkedIn post, someone seeing you on the streets, it's an opportunity to boost your brand or to detract from it. And I think showing up is actually being very mindful of that you actually are on show all the time. And so what message do you want to convey in that? So showing up as a facilitator means preparing.
Yeah.
Showing up as someone in a relationship means being a good listener. So it's being present and just remembering that every interaction is one to reinforce your brand.
Yeah. And I hear the word thoughtful and care also in the showing up. And when I think of how you show up in a very consistent way, how you would prepare your workshop in India by thinking that they're interested in cricket, so you can use the analogy of cricket, or sending me a little video snippet after our podcast interview. That was so sweet.
It was, and it's fun, and I think it's different. Yeah. You're right.
All these small details, I can totally see the show up and care.
And it's not show off at all. It's show up.
yes. Did I say show off?
There's a fine line. No, I'm just saying there is a fine line, I think, between, it's hard. It's hard to promote yourself. You talked about social media. It's very difficult to promote yourself or to just share an important message. I feel like I'm constantly balancing. I'm trying not to market, but trying to be of service. How do you find it?
I once heard someone saying that podcasting and social media should be caring at scale. And I love the concept because it just shows, of course it's self-promotion, but it's always with the audience in mind. So the listener comes first, the reader comes first, and whatever provides them with value and can inspire them is good. And if as a side effect it promotes you, even better.
Love it. Yeah, that's the key criteria. Is this what I'm about to post going to help anyone?
Yeah.
Who is it helping? Yeah, perfect. That's social media 101 for anyone listening that wants to get better at it. You've just explained it.
So from social media to podcasting to facilitation, you are, the moment now that we're recording in mid-December, you're almost 100 episodes in.
Crazy.
A century of podcast episodes. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
If you can boil it down to a nutshell, what have you learned from your podcast guests on the First Time Facilitator podcast?
Okay, one thing that I'm terrible at is just giving away one thing. I think there's probably two, and I'm really sorry, but I can't. It's so hard in 100 episodes. I think, well, the first one is a lot of people say to me, they say really nice things like, oh, your interviews are great. And I honestly don't think it's me at all. I think the fact that I'm interviewing facilitators whose job it is to be great communicators, to get great engagement, to listen well, facilitators as guests on my show are the perfect guests that you could have. So I'm constantly amazed by their ability to communicate and to share what they do. So that was one thing I think is a real lesson just for the process of interviewing great facilitators. My communication skills have increased as well, just being surrounded by awesome people. The second thing is the contradiction between every guest. And you'd think after 100 episodes, there'd be some common themes. There are. I mean, everyone talks about preparing is quite important. But then we also get, comments like, but then don't over-prepare and be prepared to put your agenda aside and just focus on the participants. We get people saying it's important for facilitators to be entertainers. And then we get other people saying, no, you're not the entertainer. The group is meant to be. So it's every conversation. I love that. So, and that's why you get facilitators, I think, that sometimes you're attracted to and sometimes you don't connect to as much. Because as participants, we've also got our preference for the style that we like in the room. So I think knowing all that, for listeners, I hope it's a case of, okay, taking on board what each guest is saying, but thinking about, does that suit my style of delivery and the way that I want to operate? And not taking it all by gospel. I think that's key.
That's such an important advice to the audience. Thank you, Leanne. Because I made a similar observation. Some prepare everything to the last slide and template beforehand, and others don't prepare anything or prepare something just in order to change it on the spot.
That's right. And even to profiling our audience, I had Tim Ferguson on the show, and he goes to the lengths of looking at LinkedIn profiles of the guests, of his participants. So the night before, he'll look at their LinkedIn profiles. And then some facilitators go, I don't want to know anything about the participants. I don't want HR to tell me who the troublemakers are because I don't want to be biased in the way that I approach them. So there's another.
And there's no right or wrong. It's just right how you feel. I remember your interview with Tim, and that he mentioned that he learns the names of all the participants because this is so important. And I kind of admire and envy him for that.
Me too. Yeah. I actually took that on board in India. I got the list just to get familiar with, particularly in other countries when the names aren't so familiar. So to even just get that, just getting used to that. Yeah. But yeah, he is absolutely next level in that regard.
Awesome. So what would be your advice after 100 episodes to a first-time facilitator?
Oh my God, you're asking me my own question. I think it would go back to finding what your uniqueness is and being powerful and in that. So reflecting on what your strengths are, reflecting on what you've enjoyed in workshops and role modeling that as well. I think we all know preparation is really important. I'll probably start from the case of what I see that goes wrong and just doing the opposite of that. I think sometimes the things that I've observed is over-reliance on technology. I think keep it simple. Like, just don't, like, it's nice to have great visuals and all this cool stuff, but at the end of the day, it's all about connecting humans, people to people. So I think try to sort of reduce your reliance on technology. Getting time on your feet is really important. You can read or listen to podcasts about workshops and delivering them, but the best way to learn is to actually be there to get the feedback, reflect, and continue. And I also, and this was challenged in India actually, because I'm a real stickler for time. I like starting my workshops on time, finishing on time. And in India, it was a 9 o'clock start, and that's when breakfast arrived. And we didn't start till like 9:30. And I was like, like I could feel that. But then I learned to relax. So I think, making sure you're very aware of the audience, what the cultural considerations, what's going on, and being adaptable to that too. Yeah, which isn't easier said than done.
Totally. This awareness of your own feelings, and when is it about you and when is it about the group? And it's so easy to get triggered by these things. I'm very punctual, and then it makes me nervous. But then thinking about the group, okay, what is it that the group needs right now? Well, if they need breakfast, then we'll be more effective afterwards.
It's exactly what I did. I was sort of just switched the focus and looked at them and I thought, I'm the only one that's really worrying. Like, why should I care? And then I was like, then I actually got to relax. So, and have a conversation and that's what they want. People want to see a person that's calm and okay. Yeah. They don't want to see a person that's just looking stressed before the workshop has even begun.
Yeah, and your stress will spill over to the group eventually. And then you can ruin just by your mindset the entire thing. Although you have the best preparation, the best agenda, the best exercises. Yeah.
They don't feel safe. They don't feel comfortable. Yeah.
Awesome. So you said that you started that your main advice would be to find your uniqueness. So what would you consider your uniqueness as a facilitator?
I think it's taken me a while to find it. And the prompt actually that gave me a bit of language around my uniqueness, because I think it is really hard for each of us to identify what that is because we're stuck inside our own head. We don't see our value. So a couple of things that helped me was the Clifton Strengths Assessment. I did that. So my top 5. So my number 1 is ideation. I won't go through all 5, but the ones that sort of stick out for me: ideation, maximizer. So that's turning good things into great things. So I'm not satisfied with just ordinary. I think that's why my workshops are a bit different, because I mean, this is my problem. Up to the moment of a workshop, I'll be like, how can we make this better? Like, how can we just make this perfect? Which gets me pretty stressed sometimes. And then also positivity and just my energy. I've just got natural energy. I do thrive around people and group settings. So I feel like my uniqueness is probably my ability to, with the ideation, connect ideas. So when I hear something about a topic in the morning, I can connect it to something that sounds pretty different in the afternoon, but people understand the connection after I explain it, which I think is really important, keeping a theme weaved through. I think having that standard of excellence and then just being really positive and providing a good energy in the room.
Yeah, going the extra mile or running it.
Yeah, there's a really good book. Yeah, I'm so unfit now, actually, after all that travel. It really knocked around my routine. But there's a really good book, I think Dr. Wayne Dyer, he wrote, It's Never Crowded Along the Extra Mile.
Awesome. What a genius title.
You don't even need to read the book to understand what that's about. Yeah. So you know it's a good title. Yeah, it's true. Like, so every time you think, oh, should I do this? Like, is it worth the effort? I always go, it is worth the effort.
Yeah.
For my brand, yeah, it's always for me worth the effort.
That's where you grow. And you mentioned that you, in the beginning, so you have to get on the feet and just to exercise. Also, the workshop facilitation is an exercise as such. And that you would get feedback. So whom did you get feedback from?
In the early days when I first started, it was usually, I wasn't throwing myself in the deep end so much because I was usually co-facilitating with someone that was either at the same level as me, so we both wanted to get experience, so we decided to do it together, or I would pair up with someone more experienced. And so their feedback was really important and would provide feedback to each other. The first bit of feedback I got was around my use of instructions. I don't know if you've heard this story. I've mentioned it a couple of times on the podcast, but after every activity, I used to say the words pens down, like pens down, pens down. I had no idea I was doing it. I was unconsciously incompetent at that stage. And then Nikki, the facilitator, she told me, I haven't said the word since. So I figured out better ways to close activities off. That's really valuable. Feedback sheets, talking to participants, asking them, reflecting on how I felt, what could have been better. Yeah, and that's a constant process.
Yeah. And it increases your self-awareness. I also tend to, right after the workshop, just writing down, how do I feel? Did it give me energy or did it take energy? And what were the factors that made me feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, I journal as well at the end of every workshop, even just to help me go to sleep at night, because otherwise I'll think about it over and over again.
Yeah, overthinking is a big part.
It is.
You mentioned earlier that you use the tool of contrast in order to manage or stimulate the energy in the room. So what do you mean by contrast?
Yeah, contrast, that word really hit me earlier this year when I was running workshops, but I feel like I've done it. It's been my style of delivery for my professional career. So I actually started off out of university working in instructional design. So this was writing. It was the most boring job in the world, but it gave me really great base for designing workshops. And you'd have this instructional design map. It was like 2 or 3 pages of what a program would look like. So what I would find this was my style, is I'd look through what I'd designed and go, right, they've got 2 videos in a row, can't do that, move the video here. Okay, they're standing up here, and I needed them to sit down. So what I was doing was, it was like just remapping it based on the type of activity.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just to get that mix. And I didn't realize, I just thought if you have 2 things in a row, that's repetitive. I personally wouldn't like that. So let's just move things around. And then I realized I just continued to do it and build on it. And I thought, wow, this contrast actually, it's not even only a thing for workshops. I mean, in exercise, high intensive, high interval training, it's like you work really hard for 30 seconds, you have a break. You work really hard, you have a break. The best food that we eat has contrast. It's, it's hard on the outside but soft on the inside, or sweet and sour. And so I thought this contrast stuff is all around us, and it really does help the way that I design things. So when I usually design a workshop, I think, what is the participant expecting? They're expecting to come in, they're expecting to sit down, to be facing a PowerPoint, for the person to come up and do the housekeeping. So I think, what's the opposite of that? Yes, which means back of the room, no PowerPoint, getting everyone to stand up and talk about themselves rather than talking about me. Yeah, I just like spinning things. I'm just doing the opposite of what is expected. So that's what really contrast means. And it's not locked down to any particular thing. It's more about standing, sitting down, looking at the back of the room, the front of the room, watching a video, then talking about it, pairing up, then reflecting individually. It's just thinking how we can contrast mediums, the way that people are in the environment, the way they're talking to each other, all of that. Yeah.
And then what I imagine is that you can really then control the energy through going from, like in the high intensity interval training, going from high intensity to reflection, calming down before then going high again. Is it how you would use it?
Yeah, and it depends, it absolutely depends on the context, the topic, the length of time. I mean, if you had a 1-hour workshop, you wouldn't have much contrast in that.
30 seconds, pens down, reflect.
Pens down. Like, stop it. Yeah, so it's really about picking the timing and how often you use it. But I found it, particularly in 3-day workshops that I've been running a lot of this year, everyone at the end of the day is like, wow, the day went really quickly. We didn't feel tired at all. They're actually amazed. And it's sad to know that that's their level of expectation, that they expect to be put to sleep and the day will drag on. So by using contrast, it seems to work for me and my style of delivery.
And would you then rather design for contrast, or would you use the contrast that is already in the room?
Both. Absolutely both. Yeah, I mean, there's huge contrast already in the room. Think of the diversity of participants, the roles that they're in, the fact that they're actually in an environment where they get to talk to each other is a contrast. That's what, sorry, on a side note, I find it amazing that you're in these workshops and people finally discover things about each other that they didn't even know. They sit next to each other. It's just a process for getting to people to connect. So I think it's building on the existing contrast. I'll design in contrast, but sometimes if I'm getting a feeling that things are lagging, then I might just bring something different in. So it's designing for it, but also picking up on when things need to be. It's like, I don't know, a piece of music. You kind of sense when it's kind of like a decrescendo and you don't want it to be. I mean, sometimes it's useful to have one where the music kind of stops, but sometimes you want it to pick up again. So
yeah, sometimes you have the impression that there's a natural ending, but then it's too early. So what would be your strategy to bring the spark of energy back into the room?
So simple things. I think even the just a case of getting people to stand up and turn to the person next to them, or stand up and find someone you haven't spoken to yet and just share one thing that you've learned. I find that standing up, using the physicality of that, because I know when I sit down and I'm staring at something, I mean, of course, for me personally, I don't respond that way. And a lot of the people that I've had in my groups are people that work on mine sites and construction projects. So they're not used to sitting down in classrooms either. So even that simple thing of getting them to stand up to talk to someone, or just putting a video on so they stop. They've heard my voice for 4 hours. They must be sick of it. So let's just put a video on. It's just thinking about what's different to where they are now to give them that bit of energy.
Thank you, Miriam. This is Andrew. I'm a facilitator and head of customer success at Session Lab, the dynamic workshop planner tool. we built Session Lab to help people design better workshops. We still remember the frustrating process of having to design workshop agendas in Excel or Word, and every time we made a change to the agenda, we would have to adjust the timing, copy and paste things back and forth, and it was hard to collaborate and ensure that we were all working on the latest version. This is why we built Session Lab, to give you a tool that allows you to focus on designing a solid group process. Check out Session Lab to save time and effort in your workshop design process, and now get your first 2 months of Session Lab Pro absolutely free at sessionlab.com/workshopswork.
And what role does then the culture play? Because you traveled around a lot over the last year, and I mentioned the example with cricket. What is it that you sense? What do you prepare beforehand, and what do you learn afterwards about the contrast in different cultural contexts?
There is a massive contrast, but we also talked about overthinking just before we hit record today. And I think sometimes with the cultural stuff, we might let it intimidate us, or we might overthink it, because at the end of the day, think of all the models that are out there. David Rock's neuro leadership, the neuroscience stuff, the SCARF model. That is for humans. And I can tell you what, it's true across the world. So there's a lot of things that are fundamentally human. With culture, I don't feel like we need to go too crazy on the culture things. It's only paying attention to things like what we're wearing. If status and hierarchy is a really big part of the culture, which it is in a lot of Asian countries, timing, how we relate to time is another thing with India. So like in Hong Kong, for example, in the workshops, there were expatriates and local employees. And the locals tended to be very quiet around the expatriates, and the expatriates were expected to talk up more. So it was the exact same program I delivered in India, in Hong Kong and Singapore. But in Hong Kong, I did much more small group discussions rather than in Australia. I would just throw out a question to a massive group and someone will respond. You can just throw questions out. But in Hong Kong, if you throw a question out to a group of 25 people, it's very quiet and you're waiting a long time to get a response, if at all.
And then maybe you only have the experts speaking up. And so it's a biased reflection from the group that you're getting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of reflection then, so even in the instruction in Hong Kong, I'd say, right, in your small groups, what did you discuss as a group, rather than saying, hey, David, what did you say? What did you think? So getting the collective, so no one's taking ownership of the idea. They're kind of feeling still anonymous because that's where they're comfortable. Yeah. And another thing in Hong Kong I did, which I just did on the spot, didn't think about it. We had a sort of think, pair, share activity, but I just put flip charts on the walls and I said, look, as a pair, write down what your thoughts are. And got much more responses than if I'd gone, hey, share with the group. Yeah. So yeah, India, my goodness, it was such a pleasure pleasure in all of the countries, but in India, people are very, like the hospitality staff are very helpful in the hotel workshop rooms. Like it feels like you've got 5 assistants. They're just bringing you teas and coffees and helping you with your stuff. Because as facilitators, we've got to do a lot of the setting up beforehand and testing all the technology and all of that.
And hosting.
It's taken care of.
Yeah, serving.
That's right. We move furniture. We do all of it. But in India, they just
support. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it makes a huge difference. And you can just focus on your job at hand rather than all the other stuff we're expected to do.
And I think that's a nice piece to be aware of also when we think of our participants, that every move, every extra task we're asking them to do takes away headspace to focus on what we actually asked them to do. Just thinking out loud.
Yeah, especially when you think of what they're feeling. I know how I feel the morning of a workshop. There's a lot of uncertainty, like what's this going to be about? Who is going to be there? How do I even get to this workshop room? There's all that cognitive thought going in before they've even stepped in.
Yeah.
You know, how am I going to manage work outside? And so our role as facilitators really is to make sure is how do we get them present and thinking about this. So
yeah, before I ask more questions about starting your workshops in these different cultures, I have one more question about contrast. You mentioned hierarchy, that hierarchies are different in different I think, industries, but also different countries. And a difference in hierarchy is a huge contrast, right?
Yes.
So how would you, if you know that there are hierarchical differences in the room, how would you, or would you at all, design for it, prepare for it? What is the challenge there?
There's a huge challenge there, particularly when it comes to being brave enough for people to share. And as you talked about, culture is huge, not only the culture of the country, but the organizational culture as well. So I've certainly been in environments where you've got people talking, but then you've got the HR team sitting at the back of the room observing. I really don't like that, because no one's going to speak up because they are unwilling to, they don't feel safe enough. They feel like I might get in trouble. And this is, you hear this an awful lot. So it really depends on how important it is to have, I find when they're in pairs or groups of 3, the status isn't as bad. It's more about when it's in a group setting, throwing one question out and everyone's sort of looking around to the most high status person to answer. So I feel like that approach of breaking it into groups, getting them to write things down so they don't own it, but it's still being discussed. The topic's still on the table, but no one's taking like the individual accountability.
Yeah.
That worked. And it took me a while to get to that point in Hong Kong to figure out maybe the second workshop I'd run, because everyone was telling me this, oh yeah, the hierarchy, and they were giving me strategies, but then I actually figured out, no, I need to get them writing down. I need to really break this activity down. So, but then after a couple of days, or even like the first morning of day 2, much more confident, willing to talk, to speak up. So again, it's a human thing. It's creating that psychological safety.
So was it then the transformation during day 1 of feeling safe, of having connection to more of the participants, maybe also the group feeling identity that kicked in? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. And as a facilitator, when you get responses, and you know this, it's, you never say, oh, no, that's not right. It's like,
yes,
and what else? Yes, and what else? What do you think? It's so nurturing that.
Although it's a fine line, because sometimes it's also important to say no.
Absolutely. Yeah, because it might absolutely be setting the wrong culture.
Yeah.
And usually I love that. But I also love it when someone else in the room will pick it up and go, I disagree. And it comes from the floor. Yeah. Because I don't want to be that sort of, and this is where the fine line really is between being a facilitator and being a trainer. Is, are we here to facilitate this group discussion and hear what you think, or is there a right answer here that...
Yeah. And then again, I don't think that we need to be dogmatic about it, because sometimes the group needs a little bit of training in between. And then if you do know something that could help the group, why would you not say it just because your title says facilitator? But then I think it's an ego game where you really have to be sure, okay, is it me who want to show off that I do know? Or is it really for the group that might need my input?
So that is such a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. I feel like I do have to ask myself a lot. And I think as first-time facilitators, I know a couple of years ago, I would have been the person that would have said it because it proved that I knew a bit more. Okay. And then now as I got more confidence, it's like, I don't need to do any of that. But awesome. I think that's the challenge when you're first time. You think, I've got to be the expert here and show them that I am.
And thank you for bringing that up. Because again, I think that's so human, that the more uncomfortable we feel or insecure, the more we want to show off. Not show up, but show off.
Yeah. Good one.
Maybe also because of cognitive dissonance. We want to be this person who's seen as an expert, as a professional, but we doubt it. So we have to do everything to appear as a professional.
Absolutely.
And I realized over the shows also of interviewing all these great facilitators that the real professional facilitator, they do less. The more experienced you are, the more you trust the group, the more you trust the process, and you let go.
Yes. That's like the ultimate. It's like the nirvana of facilitation is just letting go. You're right. I had a good conversation recently. A guy called Mark Bowden, I'm releasing a show in about a month or so, and he calls it lazy facilitation. He goes, I want it to be at a stage where at the end, after lunch, I can just leave for 10 minutes and no one even notices, because that's when I know I've done my job.
Yeah. And that's best for the group again, because if you did your job well as a facilitator, you leave and they function without you. That's what they hired you for in the first place, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the goal.
Interesting. So what would be what is your favorite exercise when you work in all these different countries? Would you have one silver bullet that always works, or would you have something that you adjust, or?
So I don't know if listeners are picking this up, but I love icebreakers. I really do. I know that's not universal. I know a lot of people roll their eyes, but this one, the one I'm about to share with you, it's worked every culture. It's worked at every level, executive general managers through to supervisors and graduates. I don't know. Have you heard of, so Drew Tarvin, I got this off his YouTube channel. It's called Stop and Walk. Have you heard of this one?
Mm-mm.
So it works for group sizes from about 10 up to hundreds. I've done up to 200 people. Everyone stands up. You go, right, when I say walk, I'd like you to walk around the room. When I say stop, I'd like you to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, so walk, stop. Everyone does it. They're like, okay. I said, right, I'm going to reverse the instructions now. So walk means stop and stop means walk.
Mm.
Yeah. So then they get a few giggles because then you say walk and they shouldn't. Anyway, then you add a couple of more instructions. Walk is stop, stop is walk. When I say name, I'd like you to yell your name. When I say clap, I'd like you to clap. Then you end up reversing those. Add two more, jump and dance. And you're like, Leanne, is anyone actually going to dance? They all dance.
Awesome.
They all dance. So what I do is I can either use this after lunch, just to give it a kickback, or at the beginning of like a day 2 or a day 3, and I'll throw in questions in between. So in between stop and walk and name and clap, I will say, all right, find the person closest to you, and I'd like you to answer this question. What was the number one thing that you learned yesterday? So I'm weaving the content through the icebreaker.
Awesome. So that it's not only an energizer, but also a reflection exercise, a connection exercise.
That's right. Yep. Linking to the topic of whatever we're talking about. Now, I do like it in the morning because a lot of people sort of a little bit tired, and it's kind of funny. Like, okay, you might need your second coffee because it really gets your brain kind of really thinking and into gear. It's a nice warm up for the brain, and usually will then tend to follow by a bit of neuroscience or something that links into why they were feeling confused. And yeah, it links in so many ways. And I think when you hear this icebreaker, you're probably thinking, hey, that's really corny. It wouldn't work. It works. I guarantee it. Yeah. I can put my stamp of approval on it. Yeah. For the right.
I totally believe you. I think it's just by being there, showing up and telling the group what to do. If they trust you as a facilitator and feel safe, then they will do whatever you ask them to do.
That's the power, and that's kind of scary. It's kind of scary the fact that our role, we walk in, we've got the PowerPoint or we're up the front of the room and people will comply.
Yeah. And I think the more you can signal and show that you prepared. So if your participants enter the room and see that it looks different, that it's not what they expected, that there is a flip chart on the wall or something or some decoration, then the more they will feel that you know or they will have the feeling that you know what you're doing, and then they just play along.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Unless it's not, I heard that with some groups, then maybe participants would not feel comfortable in doing some of the icebreakers where it's maybe about touching or jumping, dancing.
Yeah. So that's why I say it's like usually a day 2 or 3, or once you've built the trust.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing, so contrast is one sort of criteria I use. Something else that I use right at the beginning is like reduce the friction. It's like a phrase I tell myself. Make this as easy to do as possible. So it's easy to turn to someone and have a conversation. It's easy. So rather than getting them to do there's no way I'd go into day 1 of a workshop and go jump and dance. Like never. You got to earn that, I think. Earn the right to do that.
Love it.
But,
to earn that.
Yeah, just like easing them into what this is all about. So like reduce the friction.
Yeah, making it easy, facilitating. Facile. I like that. It almost sounds like a UX process.
Yeah. I use it for my life, that phrase, reduce the friction. Because when you think of a task to do, you're like, how can I make this easier? I just always ask that question. How can I make this easier? Because it's really hard at the moment. So what do I do to make it easier? Yeah.
I totally understand. And still, then I think, isn't it then somehow boring if something is too smooth, we tend to take it for given and we forget to celebrate our achievements. So I think then you might need a little bit of contrast, a little bit of obstacles, a little bit of challenge to make the path worth walking.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's still about tackling the task, but it's making it. So one day I was trying to brainstorm, like I was on my computer and I'm trying to brainstorm some, I don't know what it was. Oh yeah, I've got this acronym, DICE, Driving Influential Contagious Experiences. And I was trying to brainstorm what each letter meant to me and some stories. So I was in front of the computer and I'm like, this is hard. I said, this is not happening. So I said, how do I make this easier? So I went outside, I got some Post-it notes, I put the computer away, I put a 2-minute timer on and I got all the ideas. So it was about still the same output, but it's the process in front of a computer was too hard. So I'm like, how do I reduce the friction? Oh, hang on, I'm a facilitator. What would I do if I was facilitating a group brainstorming exercise? I wouldn't sit people in front of a computer. I would do this. So it's just constantly going, I need to do this, so it's a challenge, but how can I make it play to my energy strengths to do it?
And again, so much contrast because you're reducing the friction by adding constraints.
Yes.
So you have all the possibilities with the computer and internet, but you're actually reducing the friction and opening the mind by adding a restriction, which is a timer and just Post-it notes instead of the computer.
Yes.
I love it.
I think that's a really good metaphor because I think it relates to workshops because the answer is in the room. It's like we have the answer in our head, but we're tempted by getting onto Google, which has infinite answers. We feel like there's more out there, but it's actually already in our heads and available. But how do you collect it? I love constraints. Do you use constraints as well?
A lot, yeah. I use a lot time boxing and brainstorming sprints because I think if everything is possible, nothing is possible. If we have all the time in the universe, we don't do anything. But if we only have 2 minutes, then it's incredible what kind of ideas we can come up in 2 minutes.
I know. I love that process.
I always think of the Parkinson's law, that work will extend over the time that is available.
Yep.
And it's so true for bureaucracies.
Yes.
If you have so much time, then the task will take that time. But if you don't have time, then the task will be done faster.
And like the most effective time of a meeting is like the last 7 minutes of the meeting. It's because it doesn't matter if it's an hour or 2 hours. It's like you always get the outcomes in the last 7 minutes. So why do we have these long meetings? Good
question. And I think very often it's just also a good excuse to be busy. Oh, I'm in a meeting. So it's a good way to avoid all the nitty-gritty tasks that we actually try to avoid anyway.
That will actually be useful, like the 80-20 principle. Yeah. So true.
After all the workshops that you have designed and facilitated, or before I ask this question, you mentioned that you're mostly doing 3 days trainings. You also do, I think, pure facilitation. So what is it that your clients hire you for? I only quit my job in February of this year. So the work that I've been given has been built on the back of relationships. So first of all, I would say the trust. They saw me in corporate beforehand, or they've seen me somewhere else. They trust that I will deliver. So I think that's the number one. Like I know when I was working in corporate learning and development, I would always go for the person that I'd seen before that I know they'll show up. I know they deliver. I know they'll get great feedback. I know they do the work, and that's why I'll get them. So I think the number one thing is that people trust me, and that's why I get calls for the areas so I actually haven't really niched down on my topic of expertise. I'm very much a generalist still. I know a lot of different things about leadership and team development, but I'm not like the productivity expert or the neuroscience expert yet. I don't know what I want to focus on, but that's why I get called for all different things, like really random, like values workshops through to a train the trainer session, through to 3-day leadership courses, unconscious bias, all of this stuff. Awesome.
Is fundamentally because they know that when they hire me, they can trust me. So I think that's why. It's just, I don't really get sick too often, touch wood. I'm pretty healthy, energetic. I will do the work. I'll prepare. I'll show up early. I'll stay till the end. I'll give reports. I'll go the extra mile.
Thank you for sharing that. It relates nicely to an episode that I recorded with Kirsty Lewis about how can clients actually identify the facilitator they need. How do we find the perfect facilitator for our challenges? And I think what you just described is really the essence, that it's so much about the personality and about the type of person you're hiring. And then if you trust them, they will make it happen.
Yeah. I also think it's being very clear on like your level of energy. So if a company is going through a massive restructure, I don't think I'm the perfect person to bring in because I have a light sort of happy, whereas I got a friend called Steph who asked, Steph Clark, who I'm sure you've connected with on LinkedIn. She's very good at asking really great questions and listening intently and going deep with people. But and so I feel like that's fine. I think we all have our separate areas, and if clients want a particular type of energy and style about that, as you said, you're more attracted to that person. But for something else, and I don't want to do that work. I don't want to do that awful making people redundant mergers. That does not interest me. So I
no
feel
dancing
like
involved.
Yeah. Come on, that's right. So like I do want to get people from the good to the great. Like that's the ideal target for me.
Yeah, that's when your eyes start to shine. And it's so funny. I had a conversation yesterday with a fellow facilitator that we kind of attract this special sort of clients unconsciously, but they somehow...
I'm doing a lot of work on mindset at the moment. Like I'm doing a lot of work on abundance mindset, which I think is so important now when you're a solopreneur, because getting out of that stable and steady income, it's like these peaks and these troughs. And in the last month or two, I made enough that was like an equivalent of 3 months' salary, right? But then I got back to Australia. I'm thinking, I'm not busy now. I need to get work. That's not true. But it's like, and then that's not helpful, that mindset, that scarcity. And then you start accepting jobs that you shouldn't, applying for gigs that you shouldn't. So I'm doing a lot of work on that.
And this observation that we are so trained, our brain is so trained to this monthly paycheck. So even if you, as you said, 1 month you get the triple, so the next 2 months you actually don't need this income.
No, but you still like, but
still you're like, it makes you feel vulnerable and uncertain and, oh my goodness, now you're going to fail, although everything is fine.
This is going to be it forever. That was the last workshop ever. And you're like, it's totally irrational. Yeah.
So funny.
I like Jim Rohn. I don't know if you've listened to his work. He's my favorite speaker. He's long gone now, but I'll send you a video. Yes. A lot of his quotes really resonate with me, but he says like the right time to start planting the seeds is in the winter. When things are going well, that's when you plant the seeds because you want to prepare yourself for the downtime. So I think that's probably the challenge with our business is while we're doing all the work, we still need to be working on the business development and the consistency.
Yeah. And that's why, we need to show up each time and give our best and help them to get them from good to great. And also push ourselves from good to great constantly.
Yeah.
Was there a workshop that you walked out and you were like, didn't work, failed? And what is the thing that would make a workshop fail for you?
It was the reason I started the podcast. I feel like it was a workshop failure, even though it wasn't. It was probably there's one participant that particularly got to me, and this is when I was a first-time facilitator. I was in Canada, and it was on the afternoon of day one, and it was a part where each person has to come up to the front of the room as part of a program. I hadn't written the program. Come to the front of the room, present for 2 minutes. So just getting used to talking in public. And it was going really well for a while. Like each person got up, got feedback, doing really well. Then it came around to this one person and he just said, I'm not doing it. And crossed his arms. I'm not doing it. I was like, okay, what the heck do I do here? I was like, okay, no worries. And then I was like pointed at the next person, hey, would you like to come up? And he's like, no. And he decided to not.
Wow.
And you could feel the mood had been going really well and it just thud. Luckily that morning I talked about a model about learning how we learn is about getting out of your comfort zone. So I brought that back and then spent a good 5 minutes talking about this and saying, look, it's your choice. I mean, you don't have to, but it's just he didn't have to do it, but it was just the way that the tone that he did it in and how that affected everyone else because he was a high status individual. Anyway, the second guy ended up coming up and we got it back on track, but I just couldn't sleep that night. I was like, and I was actually getting fearful the next day. Like, what if he comes back in the room and does it again? What if he does it for another activity? Like, what do I do? And so that's why I started the podcast. Was I got back and I'm like, how can I make sure that I'll create an environment where, look, and it might be okay for this to happen and fine, let's talk about it. Like why I had no idea how to cope with that sort of thing. So I thought I'd love to just so I rang up all my facilitator friends and go, what would you have done? And I thought, this would be an interesting podcast. What do people do in these situations and how do they manage?
And it's funny that you say that because one idea that came up to my mind that I would like to do with the podcast are what if calls, like what if conversations. What if you come late to your own workshop? What if a participant... So all these kind of worst case situations and just to hear how others would deal with them.
That would be such a great idea. Do it.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah, that's
I'll
really
call
cool.
you up again.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. If this would happen today, how would you react? How would you deal with the situation?
So it's not about that moment. It was about everything leading up to, it was the preparation, the fact, like I don't think I'd set the environment. I'd probably even move that section to, and actually give them some time. So I would have probably set the beginning of the day, if it was that afternoon. I'm just letting you know that in the afternoon, we've got this activity. I'm going to prepare you for it now so that when it comes around, you can think about whether you want to participate and then, so kind of give them more of a opportunity to digest it.
Yeah.
Because I put myself in that person's shoes and think if this was thrown upon me, and I found out later things were going on outside in his personal life, so that's fine. So maybe making an environment where it's okay to not do it.
Yeah.
I think that's fine. Just being more comfortable with that, but also doing as much to mitigate it. And then if it happened and he was quite aggressive about it, like he was, I would have said, okay, everyone, let's have a quick tea break. Hey, Rob, can we just go have a quick chat outside? And just go, look, what's going on and have that chat. Yeah.
And you mentioned, if I got it right, that this agenda was set by someone else, so you didn't design it.
No.
Would you still do that to facilitate a workshop that has been designed by someone else?
I have, to be honest. The work I was doing earlier this year was it was designed, and hopefully the client isn't listening. But yeah, absolutely. But the course was completely different in India and as to Hong Kong. Yes, I absolutely redesigned. The content elements remain the same, but sometimes I'll think about what I'm hearing from the group and how much time I spend on a particular topic, depending on what challenges or opportunities they're talking about. So I'll move things around. I'll put breaks where there shouldn't be breaks. I will, absolutely change videos and do stuff just to match the audience. So yeah, I actually have about 15 different versions of the same presentation on my computer.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure. You have to. I feel like that whole maximizing.
Otherwise, you also get bored yourself.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I interviewed a guy on my show. He's delivered the same workshop like hundreds of times. I was like, how do you do that?
Yeah. A professor at uni whom I worked for, he once said that he doesn't give a lecture more than 3 times because after 3 times he doesn't learn anything anymore.
Yep.
And I loved it. That even a professor giving statistics, econometrics 101, he would say, after 3 times I don't learn anymore, so I need to teach something.
Yeah. I have empathy with that man. Yeah. And so that's why I was like always reading about new things and bringing it, just to make it fun for myself as well.
Yeah. Awesome. After almost 1 hour of conversation, is there anything that you feel we haven't touched that you would like to share?
I've loved every moment of this conversation. I think the questions that you've asked have really made me dig deep on the way that I approach things. And I'm just really grateful to have this opportunity to chat with you. So I'm very content with how the conversation has gone. If you've got any more questions for me, though.
I think I would have an entire book full of questions. But it must not remain the last conversation we have.
No, I'm sure there'll be many more.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to it. And also just to observe how your 2020 will evolve, because there have been so much development in what you're doing, and your audience can basically follow you literally. Yeah, in your development. So that's nice.
Yeah, it is fun. It is fun. I don't want 2020 to be out of control like this year was. It wasn't out of control, but I'd love a bit more focus, I think. Yeah. How about what's your 2020 got in store for you?
Funny enough, for me, it's similar. So 2019 was a lot of exploration, just saying yes to everything and trying.
Mm-hmm.
And I started the podcast in 2019. So only I think in March and April, I had my first episodes out. So a lot of things happened that I could have never planned with the podcast. I mean, you might know that. You throw yourself out there, and then suddenly there's a dynamic around the podcast that happens that impossible to plan for that.
I know, and that's the coolest thing. My friend tour, Jenny Blake, she calls it serendipity popcorn, where like someone will listen to a podcast and reach out and absolutely just creates its own energy. It's the best thing, isn't it? Podcasting is amazing.
So I want to leverage this more because there's so much. I learned from each podcast guest so much, and there's too much knowledge in my brain that I can even use for my own workshops and facilitation. So I really want to go more into how can I leverage my knowledge and share it to really help others to design more interesting workshop agendas, because I do have all the tools now at hand.
You've got them all. Like, if you think of all the transcripts and all the amazing quotes that you've got, and it's staggering. Yeah. It's so great that you've joined along. It's so good.
Nice. Thank you. So if someone in the audience fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up, doesn't have time to listen to the show again, what do you want this person to remember?
What will I like them to remember is to identify what's uniquely strong and powerful to them and double down on that, getting really clear on what people are observing from their interactions and taking notice so they can start building up the repertoire of what makes them unique. And just remember that there are cultural differences when you facilitate workshops, but humans are fundamentally human and are driven by the same things. So all the stuff that you've learned about facilitating and great design, it applies pretty much globally.
Awesome. And if someone wants to hire you, work with you, get inspired by you, how can they find you?
Awesome. So they can listen to my podcast, First Time Facilitator. Start by listening to my interview with Miriam. That's a good start. And then my website is just at leannehughes.com.
Awesome. I put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking time and joining me.
Thank you, Miriam, for waking up so early to have a chat to me.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.